Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 223, cover dated November 1987. So this cover, there's no cover caption, none needed because it's Storm versus a giant snake, and you can just make out Naze coming here in the background. And for the third issue in a row, we've got this sky blue background. So that's been a bit of a motif color-wise for the covers to 221, 222 and this one. The cover here by guest artist of the issue, Kerry Gammill, inked as ever by Dan Green, series inker. So let's open this one up to the splash page. Remember these guys, last seen in issue 216, it's Crimson Commando and Stonewall. At the end of issue 216, Storm convinced the pair to hand themselves over to authorities. And obviously what's happened in between is Val Cooper's heard of them and made them an offer they couldn't refuse. So they are hereby, and with their full acceptance of the terms and conditions thereof, conditionally commuted to service with the Federal Enhanced Power Strike Team Freedom Force under the supervision of herself, Presidential Assistant Valerie Cooper. And who's she talking to? Well, we'll turn the page in a moment, but the title of this issue is Omens and Portents, and the creative team is Chris Claremont, writer as ever, Kerry Gammill, guest penciler, Dan Green, inker, Tom Orzechowski, letterer, Glynis Oliver, colorist. And just something to note here of interest is last issue the editor-in-chief was Jim Shooter, but Jim Shooter has been let go from Marvel and has been replaced by Tom DeFalco. So let's turn over the page. Who's Val making the presentation to? It's Mystique and Freedom Force themselves in their Georgetown apartment, brown house. And so Mystique is complaining there to Val about the last recruit they sent, or she sent them, which was Spider-Woman. And even though there isn't an editorial note here, what she's referring to is Avengers Annual number 15, when Freedom Force was sent after the Avengers. And that version of Spider-Woman left Freedom Force. So she abandoned the team. But Val here is saying it won't happen again. And Mystique introduces Crimson Commando and Stonewall to the deal. The deal's simple. We play the federal game. We get pardoned. Any one of us breaks parole by committing a crime or deserting, everyone else pays the price. Try double cross, gentlemen, you'll answer to me with your lives. And then we've got some comic business with Pyro and the Blob there with his FF for Freedom Force on his costume. And he tries to push Stonewall down, fails. And then here Crimson Commando is saying about Stonewall that the reason that Storm got the better of him in the story told in 216 is because she caught him by surprise, and Stonewall won't be caught off guard so easily again. So here he is lighting up a cigarette, and then Pyro has a little bit of fun and he uses his mutant control of flame to create this flame version of Crimson Commando, who lights his cigarette here. And in the background here we have Spiral, and she has perceived a threat. She addresses Pyro and says, "Douse your flame slave, Pyro, make ready to put your ability to control fire to serious use." An intruder approaches. And so she dances between dimensions and manipulates reality out into the garden of the house that they're living in. And outside doing a bit of gardening is Avalanche. And then he is surprised by this person racing across the boundary wall of the house, knocks him over, but he himself is knocked over, tripped by Spiral, who catches him. And who does it turn out to be? Except for Super Saber, the third of the World War II era or Golden Age villains. And Spiral asks Mystique whether she should slay this interloper, and Crimson Commando says no and explains who he is. And then the whole business is interrupted by a scream, and so they all race back into the house, and it's Raven. who has screamed, not Raven, sorry, it is Irene Adler, it is Destiny who has screamed. And great lettering here by Orzechowski. Look at the size of this lettering, right? This is tough to do with this degree of control. A real pro, real skill shown here. She says, darkness, madness, maw, teeth, tearing, ravening, all-consuming, never satisfied, no light, no hope, shattered, broken, plunging, tumbling, dying, so much, too much loss, cannot bear. And she says she'll never be all right again to Mystique when Mystique tries to comfort her. And then she explains, I was using my precognitive talent to check on our foster daughter, Rogue, as I do from time to time, searching the future for any significant threats to her life. Mystique, I found oblivion, she says. I searched every conceivable time stream, not merely for a trace of Rogue, but her teammates as well. The result was the same. Mystique, sometime very soon, the X-Men are going to die. So this is really our prologue, the beginning of Fall of the Mutants, and a reference to the adversary, whose plan is to bring his brand of chaos and anarchy to our dimension and world. And speaking of the adversary, we switch to the Rocky Mountains, somewhere in Colorado, our narrative caption tells us, and Storm's fishing. And she is just using her hands here to catch a fish under Naze's supervision. Remember, Naze is possessed by the adversary, unbeknownst to Storm. So he seems to be weakened here and falls into the river. Storm pulls him out. She thinks the man was always lean and now he feels little more than skin and bones and his flesh burning to the touch with fever. I'm ashamed. So she brings him to this line shack for shelter, sets him up in a bed, gets the fish boiling on the pot there, and basically he explains or tells her that he's been poisoned by the venom from the demons they fought in the previous issue, the Eye Killers. And he also says the closer they come to Forge's Eyrie, the mountain that's his place of power, his magic mountain, stronger his influence grows. Enough now to overwhelm my spells. Worse to come, Storm, I can sense it tonight, can't help this time. You got to fight and win alone. So what is Naze's, the adversary's game? And then we have this interesting switch of scene, just one page. We've got 7 panels here set in Queens, borough of New York. And we get the caption, blue collar borough, working man's bar, nothing fancy about either. But this is where you'll find the people who consider themselves the backbone of the Big Apple. Real people with real problems and real fears. And the whole purpose here is to establish growing bigotry regarding mutants. So this guy here says to this reporter who's writing a piece, he says, I seen a picture of one once, a mutie. He had blue fur, for crying out loud, and a tail. Didn't even have a decent name, called himself Nightcrawler or some such. That's human? Mr. B, we're human. That was something else. And he concludes at the end, I tell you, as this guy writes down what he's saying, I tell you, Mr. B, I'm a religious man. I believe in the sacraments, but I wouldn't let the abomination even be born. That's if he had a mutant for a child. As God is my witness and my judge, I'd kill the monster. So that's pretty grim stuff there. And that's all it is. Like, this doesn't get picked up again. So it's just kind of checking in with what's going on in the human population. We saw a bit of this happening in the trial of Magneto in Paris, where there was crowds chanting against mutants. And we saw it in issue 210 of Uncanny X-Men as well, where there was a crowd after Nightcrawler, and Kitty Pryde had to talk them down. And so here we have it again, and this is all leading up to kind of a ratcheting up of that theme of bigotry in the title, which will get an ultimate expression in the Genosha storyline coming up in about a year and a half's time. And here we switch to San Francisco, a city renowned for its tolerance and which the X-Men experienced in that fashion, back in Uncanny X-Men 206, and they're residing there now. And they are living incognito, covertly, on Alcatraz. So Rogue has been flying around looking for any trace of the Marauders after the end of their battle with them in the previous issue. And Psylocke contacts her and says, hopefully, Rogue, this is the last place they'll think to look for us, on Alcatraz. And then our attention, we see that, actually this is interesting, we see the Blackbird here under a tarpaulin net, disguising it from any spies in the sky. And then we see the X-Men keeping trim and training in a prison yard here on the island. And we've got a little training session between Dazzler and Longshot. And actually something to note here, no, I'll note it in the next couple of pages. Like, this is the period of flexographic printing, which was not always a success and often led to very blurry looking images on some of the pages. This is a particularly sharp page. Now, I want you to contrast this to what we see when I turn over the page. So, nice little action sequence here. I should give some praise for Kerry Gammill. The art is, like, it's not at a Mark Silvestri level or an Art Adams level, but it's pretty decent, pretty competent, and he does a great fight sequence starting in the next couple of pages. Kerry Gammill, I would say, influenced by John Byrne, and Dan Green kind of inking Gammill's pencils to make it a little bit consistent with the Silvestri look. So basically, Dazzler's overconfident here, nearly gets nailed by one of Longshot's flechettes and is saved by Rogue, and these two have a bit of a tense relationship with each other. And then Wolverine, who's acting team leader in Storm's absence, hops off his perch where he's been observing the fight, having a little cigar in the meantime. And he has this exchange with Dazzler, which is pretty funny, where he says to her, "You were grandstanding, Dazzler, with that ricochet stunt," and she coughs. And she asks him, "Wolvie, do you mind your cigar smoke? My voice, I'm a singer. Thought you were an X-Man." Pretty smart reply by Wolverine. "Which is it, girl? Make up your mind, this is no game. Don't show off. Just get the job done as quickly and simply and efficiently as you can. And above all, be ready," as he pops his claws, takes a drag on his cigar, "for anything." This is a pretty nice anchor image here. So most of these pages, Kerry Gammill is drawing Claremont script with 6 panels. So this is a nice 5-panel page, and so you get space for an anchor image like that. And then we get this great action sequence over these 2 pages, where he attacks all 3. Rogue seems to get the better of him. She thinks here, strobe effects so concentrated and bright, even closed eyes won't protect him. And while all Wolvie can see are ugly spots, big as plantation houses, job's done, sugar, she says. Bad guys beat as simply and as quickly and simply as and efficiently as can be, just the way you like it. Say uncle now, real nice, and maybe I'll let you up to finish your beer. So he looks pretty pleased. Fair move, darling, he says, but you got to watch this tendency to think the fight's over. And this is a great 3-panel sequence here, where he grabs her around under her arms, which lifts her hands up off him, and she loses her balance on his hands. Then he's able to flip her over. So this is like a wrestling move. And then, of course, he gets his fist right under her neck, claws ready to pop. And "Uncle, darn it," she whispers. So Wolvie's proved his point. Confidence is fine. Acting cocky will cost you. He draws the distinction between the two. And then that point I was making about flexographic printing, this is very blurry. This panel in particular, very, very blurry. So one of the downsides of that new printing process, and another piece of information that's emerged over the last couple of years regarding the flexographic printing, is that Marvel, put out tender to a number of different printing companies to do the job, and they went with the cheapest quote. So, like, you pay peanuts, this is what you get, this blurry panel here, and on plenty of other pages too. And then what happens is our scene switches, because the X-Men are not alone on Alcatraz. In the previous issue, they rescued Madelyne from the Marauders, and so she too is on Alcatraz. Great colours by Glynis Oliver on these couple of pages here. Great little kind of collage of Madelyne's history here, which we get in the narrative captions, regarding her being a pilot, strong, self-reliant, good at her profession, a born survivor, a solo act, and content with it till she met Scott Summers. Didn't matter that he was mutant and X-Man. She loved him, wed him, bore his son. The happiness lasted a year. Then without warning, he left home. No real explanation, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. A secret she knew, something bad. So this is Claremont making narrative character capital on what was an editorial decision by diktat by Jim Shooter, that the original X-Men must have their own book, X Factor. That's why Scott was broken up from Madelyne. But Claremont working with that and turning it into like giving it like narrative consequences and heft, and making something out of it that is engaging and interesting and treats the characters like real people. So Madelyne here, like, just really upset, thinking there's nothing left, not even my wedding ring, because when she woke up from her coma that she was in after Arclight and Scalp Hunter attacked her, she spent months in a coma in San Francisco. All traces of her identity have been erased. Every possession obliterated as completely as my past. Not even her wedding ring was left to her. I turned to the police for help. They couldn't find any record that my baby had even been born. They thought I was crazy, the doctors too. Her baby has been abducted by the Marauders, and we don't know where he is. So she concludes here, the X-Men saved her. She wishes they almost hadn't. Was Scott lying, she thinks, when he said he loved me? Didn't our marriage vows mean anything? Why hasn't he tried to find me? Doesn't he care? Stupid question. His actions are his answer. She tears up the newspaper and throws it over the cliff's edge into the sea. And she thinks here, I lost him the minute he walked out my door, and I've even less hope of finding my son. He could be anywhere in the world. If he's even alive, what's the point of even looking? So she seems to be in despair. Havok, Alex Summers, Scott's brother, is out jogging, running. This is something he does when he's stressed. And we'll see him do that again in Uncanny X-Men 248, the one drawn by Jim Lee. And he spies Madelyne on the cliff's edge and thinks to himself, oh my gosh, does she mean to jump? And then he shouts out to her, Madelyne, don't. But we switch back now to the Rockies and Storm and Naze. And there's something bubbling here on the fire in this pot. And what could it be? Now, again, this is a really, really well printed page compared to some of the previous ones. Everything here is sharp. The inks, the color, really sharp. But other pages, not so much. So he has this restorative soup on, which he says that brew prevents sickness as well as cures it. The human being's equivalent of chicken soup. Trust me, do you a world of good. So he convinces Storm to try the concoction, and immediately she does. There's a roar at the door and these claws come through the wooden door. And before I turn the page, this is a pretty cool ad here for upcoming storylines in the X universe. It's 1987. Do you know what your children are? No labels on these, but Mutie on this one. Paid for by citizens in support of the Mutant Registration Act. So bigotry ramping up in the Marvel Universe. And then here, this is a great anchor image with this bear. The fur nicely rendered by Dan Green's inks here with obviously with a brush. And so Storm faces off against the bear, and the bear slashes at her and knocks her off the edge of this cliffside again into a frozen lake. So she notes that suddenly the weather has changed entirely. They were in midsummer, yet the pond froze solid in a matter of minutes and the land is being swept by an Arctic blizzard. Now, of course, Storm doesn't have her powers, and so she's not able to deal with any of this via her powers. And then she's attacked by this huge water snake, the one that we saw on the cover, and she gets the better of it, stabs it in the eye, and then leaps out off the back of the snake to the edge of the lake, but she just manages to hang on to the cliffside here, and the snake comes after her, but the snake itself is caught by some bombs. So what's happening here? This is all going pretty weird. And then she finds herself seeing once again images that she first saw in issue 186 and saw again recently in 220. She thinks here this mountain forest has become tropical jungle, a war zone, Vietnam. I feel its steaming heat, yet the blizzard still rages. Somehow the two realities overlap. Those demons, I saw them months ago as part of a holographic display in Forge's penthouse. I wondered then if they were fantasy or some nightmare from Forge's past. Now I know. He must have conjured the creatures to slaughter his enemies. And we see that confirmed in the course of the upcoming Fall of the Mutants storyline. And so then she climbs to the top of this cliff here and finds, who is it except for Forge, enjoying himself, asking, is that a crime? What's the point of having power if it's never used? I'm the maker, remember, he asks, but instead of building toys like my prosthetic hand, I plan to reshape creation. Want to help? And these claws, metallic claws, emerge from out of his gloves, and she rejects his invitation. And then he says, stupid cow, as if you had a choice. See, your soul accepts gladly, gloriously what your mind denies. We are one. But Storm isn't going to be corrupted by Forge, this version of Forge. So she grabs her knife and stabs him. And this is a preview of something that she's going to do in reality very soon. So Forge is dead, but is it Forge? No, it's not. But at that most terrible of... she finds herself back in the Lion Shack, her clothes and body undamaged, untouched, unhurt. So this was all part of her vision quest. The trial is ended, says Naze, and he's back to his hale and hearty self. Nothing happened. It was only a dream, she concludes. But he says heartily, you forget, child, dreams are but reality cast in a different form. What you endured had a substance and meaning all its own. And what it is that she's prepared to kill Forge, destroy him when they meet. And look at Naze's wicked grin. Remember, he's possessed by the adversary. And the midsummer scene outside the Lion Shack begins to take on a winter cast as the adversary's plans come together. And then we have our final couple of pages, 23 pages of story in this issue, so a pretty substantial story, amount of story, I mean, and no letters page. And we're back at Alcatraz and the resolution of this scene between Havok and Madelyne as he climbs up to the cliff's edge. And he asks her, what's wrong? And so she says to him, like, you've got to be kidding. And she goes through all the business about Scott and the fact that these marauders tried to kill her and stole her baby. And I haven't a clue of a reason, except that it's bound up with my husband and the life he leads. I'm no mutant, Alex. I'm not an X-Man, but I'm part of your war. So, and she says here, I'm one of the non-combatants who always get maimed and slaughtered by the bullets aimed at you. My whole life I've fought to stand alone, to depend on nobody but myself, only now I can't. So you want to quit? He asks. Human beings can't survive in your league, Alex. So what's the sense of even trying? Then Alex gives her a pretty good reason as to why. Hey lady, you're not the only one who's suffering or who wanted a normal life only to see it blown to bits. He talks about Lorna, possessed by mallets, how he's not going to give up. And he says to her, if worst comes to worst, all I'll have left of Lorna's and my life together are memories. But you, Madelyne, you guys have a child. If you give up, what happens to him? And she says, I loved and trusted your brother, and he let me down. He wasn't there when his family needed him. I'll never forgive that, and I'll never let myself become so vulnerable again. That doesn't mean you have to stand alone, he says. If the X-Men is anything, it's a family. I've only just begun to realize that. We're strong because we stand by each other. That way we can survive anything. That way, no matter what, we'll win. You sure? She asks. Bet my life on it. Then chum, so will I. So this is interesting too, because we've had some foreshadowing with Destiny's precognitive vision of Fall of the Mutants. And there's some foreshadowing here of upcoming events in the subsequent big crossover storyline, that is Inferno. And even this kind of magenta sunset here, these are the colors of Inferno: yellow, orange, magenta, pink. Interesting that. I wonder, had Claremont in mind some of what he was going to do with Havok and Madelyne in Inferno already at this point. And he did plan ahead, like he plotted out his stories years ahead. One last thing I want to note about Kerry Gammill's art here is the John Byrne influence. Very John Byrne pose here. This is extremely John Byrne, especially the face on Alex here. And the mouth, look at the way the mouth is, and the bottom lip is rendered. Pure John Byrne here. Let me know what you think of that in the comments. So, I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on Uncanny X-Men 223. If you did, please like the video. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.